Hello and welcome to the very first Authors Afterword Live. We are here at the wonderful Goldfinch Books in Alton. This is a relatively new indie store. It's amazing. It has a great community. Can you all hear me? Brilliant. And it has a bar, it has cake, it has workshops, it has writing groups, it has book groups. Oh my goodness, massive book group. It is wonderful here. And so we're here with our live audience. Can I get everyone to say hello? Because we are recording. Awesome. Thank you. Have we got the video recording as well? Brilliant. Okay. So I'm your host, Charlie Place. Thank you all for coming. This is wonderful. You look amazing. Today, we are joined by, and I'm really thrilled that they have agreed to come back on the podcast. And for this, my first live event, we're going to get them to introduce themselves. Go ahead.
Hello, I'm Alex Hay. I'm the author of The Queen of Fives and The Housekeepers.
I'm Lucy Barker. I am the author of The Other Side of Mrs. Wood.
Hi everyone, my name's Stacey Thomas and I'm the author of The Revels.
Hey. Alex was published just recently, his second book. Can we get a cheer for that, please? It's amazing. The Queen of Fives. So, we're going to start with you, Alex. You tell us how it was writing the second book.
Oh, the difficult second book. It was quite difficult, actually, to be truthful. So I had heard that they're quite tricky beasts, and this one proved to be the case. So my first book, The Housekeepers, was in many ways just a real joy to write. It was a heist. It had a sort of plot structure that worked on the page very quickly. And when I came to start book two, I had so enjoyed that kind of classic caper framework that I wanted to try it again. And I decided to try con rather than a heist. And naively, I thought if I sort of followed the same planning process that I had with my first book, everything would just fall into beautiful place. And it did not prove to be the case at all. My plan was a bonfire, and so were the first 10,000 words, and so were the 10,000 words after that. So there was a lot of throwing things out the window, almost myself, and starting over. And interestingly, I think out of all of that, I learned that it's sort of only through writing books and repeating the process and rinsing and repeating again that you start to work out that you do have the stamina for it. You can see it through to the end. And before we started recording, I was saying to Charlie, looking at the book in front of me now, I feel this sort of sense of relief and bewilderment that we actually got here. It's actually over the line. So yeah, it was a journey and challenging and head scratching in equal measure, but we made it. Woohoo.
Brilliant. Well, so I've got down here something we talked about before. You got your character Hepzibah from your first book. And you said when we last spoke, you had to cut a lot of it and used it for book two, which we have now. Has this happened?
This is why I love Charlie Place. She remembers all the details. Don't
tell him I listened to the YouTube beforehand.
Perfect preparation, always. In my first novel, I had a group of characters who were con artists. And I'd spent some time researching real-life fraud cases from the late 19th century, but I hadn't really didn't have enough room in that book to really play with any of that. And when I came to start The Queen of Fives, I thought, right, now is the time when I can pull out some of those notes on cons and started to go back to some of those ideas and start to do research into various charlatans that have been operating on both this side of the Atlantic and the other. Very astute question. I had a character that I adored in book one and took some of those threads and ran with them for book two.
Okay, so you're saying about the con ideas for book one that you didn't use. Was there anything else in this vein that maybe you haven't used yet or you decided not to use at all that you can tell us about?
Oh, that's a good question. I'm going to keep my cards closer to my chest this time because I come to book three and see what happens. No, I don't. I'm not sure. It will be interesting to hear what the others think as well. I think you research for historical fiction far more than you need. And I think it's a commonplace to say that, you can't put it all on the page because it would become incredibly tedious. But it's by going down some of those research rabbit holes that you find the sort of nuggets and jewels that really call to you, speak to you, make your imagination spark. And sometimes those do sort of create threads that you can't weave into the narrative you have in hand. And yeah, I always sort of feel as though I could spin off various different angles and various different stories. And I think that's the joy, actually, for me. I really enjoy having quite a big cast and lots of points of view. And I think when you do have a big ensemble, it gives you that room to sort of potentially set up some other subplots and see if they could spin off into other worlds. But yeah, we shall see.
How many ideas have you currently got for books? How many books are in your head at the moment?
Oh, that's a good question.
No spoilers though, but you know.
Do you know what? I don't think I am someone who would say I've got hundreds and hundreds of ideas and all I need is the time to write them. I think, and it'll be really interesting to hear the others' perspective on this, I really enjoy working an idea and working a concept up and trying to find a hook that feels compelling and big enough and juicy enough and interesting enough to me to spin into a novel. But I don't have many of those every year. I would say I kind of have a runway in my mind of books not yet written, but I would say I'm maybe 2 or 3 ahead. I'm definitely not someone, and I've heard people say this, that they could be like, I know what my next dozen novels would be. That is not me.
Okay, I've got a question, but I'm going to leave it to the end. Can we bring Lucy and Stacey in? Can you tell us how you've been writing your second books? Because you guys are still writing, aren't you?
Yeah.
Yes.
Stacey first?
Oh God, I feel like, because with The Rebels, it was my debut novel, so I feel like before that I wasn't really part of the writing community. So when I got my publishing deal, it was like this whole new world that I had entered, and it was just really amazing. But then I also just feel like, yeah, it's just the idea of being like a working writer. And then I also just feel like the things that I think maybe when I was working on my second book, I kind of got stuck on the idea like how similar in like theme or tone does it have to be to the first one. And I think when I was reading Alex's second book, there was this line where the character Quinn, she's like, oh, when you slip into another person's skin, it takes a while to come out. And I feel like for me, that's how it felt when I was writing the second book, because it's set in the 1950s. So worlds away from the 17th century. And so it's this idea the language has to be different, the way, people interact with each other, it's changed massively. And so I think it's just that, and then it's that thing, it's like, oh, I'm not having witches in the second book, but it was like, oh, do I still need a love story? Or the sort of the way the characters are interacting. So it has been a real sort of journey. But then I feel like as I've been writing it, it's sort of that idea, you're kind of inhabiting other people's, their physicality and their characters. And I feel like maybe when I'm writing it, because I write from the first person, I kind of want to sort of almost become the character. I hope it doesn't sound too weird in a way, but kind of really slip into their sort of skin and their mindset. And so it was a bit of a challenge kind of getting there. But then I feel like once I kind of got there, it's sort of easier. Although I wish I could be one of those people who can turn out a draft with the click of their fingers. Yeah.
I've got a follow-up question for that, actually, before we go to you, Lucy, if you don't mind. You have such a particular mode of language, given that you are writing, or for your first book, The Rebels, you have written in the Jacobean era.
Yes.
How has it been changing to your new book, your latest book? Because I'm guessing the language has had to change quite a lot.
Yeah, I think obviously with the 1950s, it's a lot more modern, but then when you read the books and set during that period, and then also books written now but set in the past, there is a certain type of attitude. And I think maybe what I like about historical fiction is that a lot of the times, there's still that contemporary element, but then there's also something slightly kind of old-fashioned about it. And so I think it's sort of with music, it's a different rhythm to it, and just sort of trying to figure out what the rhythm is. But then I just remembered someone just saying with my first book, with the way I write the characters, it's sort of they're sparring. And so I feel with me, once I have the sort of main character, it's that thing, I sort of like it when there's that sort of back and forth in a way. And so that kind of what propels the story along.
Go on then, Lucy. I really want to hear what you're writing. Tell us how it's been.
Okay, so I think my writing this second book has been a real eye-opener for me, because with Mrs. Wood, it was really interesting when you said that seeing the book there is bewildering and just kind of, oh my God, a relief that it's there. And I think with Mrs. Wood, I look at it now and I'm like, how did I do that? Because, but then I forget that, that's an idea that was marinating for a while, and I wrote sometimes and I didn't write other times. And then I got a publishing deal, and then I had a second book expected, and I had a year to write it. Whereas like Mrs. Wood was 3 years of like ambling around. And the thing that I found really interesting was something that you were talking about getting into the skin. Mrs. Wood, when I was writing Mrs. Wood, she was the last character that I found. So everybody else was in place. And then it wasn't until like maybe the third or fourth draft that I got fully into her skin. And then there she is. And that's happened very much so with this with this book, where I've got a character and I've done 2 full 100k drafts and I was still not getting her. And everything is kind of fine apart from her, and my agent's like, I just don't like her. And I'm like, oh God. But now I figured out why. It's because I'm not in her yet, and no one normally sees that draft because I will have worked through it before even my agent or definitely an editor would have ever seen it. So it's about understanding that there is still a process, even though there is a deadline. And so now we're all right. But yeah, it's been and also it's interesting when you're asking about ideas and how you have ideas. And ideas have always been the thing that I really struggled with. And when I was little, I always used to say to my mum, "Oh, can you just tell me what to write? As in, give me a first sentence or give me an idea, and then I can go." So I find it really difficult coming up with. It's people that I find first. Like I'm obsessed with Ancestry. I'm on Ancestry. Like it's my social media. I'm on Ancestry.com like 4 hours a day or something. And I find the stories that I find on there really fascinating. And then I have to build a story around them. And that's what I'm doing with book 2. So I wish that I was kind of, you've got like 2 or 3 books down the line. When you said that, my blood went cold. It's like, shit, I've got another book to write after this one. Yeah. But yeah.
It's interesting that I know we've talked about it before, that when I read The Other Side of Mrs. Wood, I felt that your characters were the most important thing to you.
They are.
Yeah. And just hearing you speak here, it just really cements that. Yeah.
Yeah, no, my characters are everything to me. And I think that's when I was younger and when I was writing. That's all I just wanted to create people. I think that's why the plot is always really a struggle for me, because all I want to do is just create those people and then just shove them in a room and then just see what happens. But you have to have an arc.
So it starts with characters for you, Lucy.
Yeah.
Alex and Stacey, what about you two?
I feel like it's a mixture of both. Like I think for me, like sometimes I'm more interested in systems because, the first book was witch hunting, so I was very much interested in the system behind that. And then with the second book, it's something completely different. But then I feel like I remember a writer saying that, I really seem drawn to the sort of system and business side of it in a way. And then I feel like I sort of try to see how the world works. And then, I sort of look at the people who are inhabiting it. And like, I feel like with the characters, I'm usually drawn to the people who are sort of on the periphery of those worlds. And then wondering like, why are you here in a way? And that's kind of my way in. But then I think like with Lucy, it's that thing. It's like, I get really invested in the characters, but then it's the arc that trips me up. And it's probably why I spend so much time like on a draft trying to figure out the story.
And I think for me, it's a sort of blend of setting and a plot structure. And actually place does come first for me. So for this book, for The Queen of Fives, I knew I wanted to write a Victorian con. And the lure to me was I sort of wanted to write my own love letter to late Victorian sensation fiction. So, in my teens, I loved books like The Woman in White. I loved Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde, that sort of foggy streets, gaslight, all those vibes, all those quite high Victorian, high Gothic vibes, I really, really love. So I wanted to sort of take some of that, and I usually also start with a house. And in this case, I had two houses. One was in Spitalfields, and I could sort of see it in my mind's eye, a former silkweaver's mansion, and living in it was London's premier conwoman, a sort of queen of her own criminal court, with her own quite eccentric household around her. And then on the other side, opposite side of town, I wanted to sort of play with Berkeley Square and conjured a sort of big, blood red, weird, opulent, gorgeous but gross mansion that sort of squatted hugely on the north side of the square. And in both those cases, I really like starting there, because then it's like sort of opening the book out like a doll's house and starting to sort of look for who's inside. And once I am looking at who's inside, I'm totally like you, Lucy. Actually, then character is sort of everything. And you go down loads and loads of rabbit holes on each of the sort of psychological layers of your characters, and you have to then sort of pull it back into something that's coherent and has, as you say, has an arc and has a story. Yeah. But that's my way in. It's sort of, I'll know there's a sort of plot structure I want to play with, and then I need to find a place for it, and then I just dive in and see what's there.
You did a lot of research on Spitalfields, didn't you? You went round, and can you tell us more about your research there? Yeah,
well, I mean, Lucy and I spoke, I think probably 18 months ago, about the Charles Booth poverty maps. I know you're
obsessed with those.
A big fan like me. So for anyone who doesn't know, Charles Booth was, I think, a Liverpudlian born probably in the 1840s.
Oh God, you know even more than me.
I'm turning to the Victorian expert. And I think, like lots of sort of business people and philanthropists in the 19th century, he was really obsessed with and interested in urban poverty, and he'd embarked on this huge project to effectively map street by street London. And the result of that is that there are these incredibly beautiful colour-coded maps that sit in, they're all on LSE archives, that allow you to go street by street to work out the sort of relative wealth of the inhabitants. And London being London, you've got sort of middle-class, well-to-do families living cheek by jowl with really desperate deprivation. And I found that really interesting because it gave me quite quickly a sense of what the household of the Chateau, which is the name of this old, slightly decayed mansion in Spitalfields, would look and feel like. And I could sort of get a sense of how much coal they could afford. I could have a sense of what the sort of scale of opulence or otherwise would be, and what level of wages could Quinn give to the people around her to help sort of conjure the costumes, the sort of backstories, the all the dependencies required to pull off her cons and her games. So yeah, it was research, but it was sort of always tilted towards, but I need to be quite pragmatic about what do I need for Quinn's world and for this criminal court, so that I don't go down too many wrong turns.
Stacey,
yeah.
Given that your novel is quite different and definitely in the historical period is very different, I want to ask you that. How do you go into using location, and did that play a big part for you when you were writing?
For my second one or the first one?
We'll go with the first one, but you can bring the second if you want to, definitely.
Yeah, so basically, I think I started with fictional books first. So I read The Familiars by Stacey Halls and Beth Underdown, and like usually in their like author's notes, they'll put the books that inspired them or they'll mention it in interviews. And then I also DM'd Stacey Halls, and amazingly she responded because I just asked her like kind of what like non-fiction books she would recommend, and then she got back like the next day with all these sort of photos of books, like primary sources from the time. So she was really helpful and encouraging. And that kind of gave me a foundation on the sort of era like I was writing about, because it was set during the English Civil War. And so a lot of the times I was really much kind of reading like non-fiction books to just get an understanding of what happened. And I just remember when I was doing it, I just realized like, yeah, I'm never going to be an expert, but like I need to kind of understand like enough to know like what my character knows at the time, because it was just such a chaotic like time period. And then I also read like a lot about Matthew Hopkins, who was the Witchfinder General at the time, and then a lot of Malcolm Gaskell's books about him and like the kind of, you know, the witch hunting period in general. And so I think for me that really helped kind of set this scene of like this sort of mass hysteria that was going on at the time, and like why people were acting the way that they did. And then I also like looked at some court records as well in the archives just to see what witches were being accused of. So that was really helpful. I think I went on the National Archive, their website, and so there was a lot of interesting stuff there where you're just like, my God, did the people actually believe this was happening, or is that thing they're just, you know, making up all these outlandish tales that people were taking seriously? So it was just really like engrossing.
Mm-hmm. Talking in general, and to all of you again, has there been a time where the research that you have done has changed what you've written, whether it be in the first book, the second book? We're talking about all of them here.
God.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Oh, Lord.
Look at us, we're all like...
Yeah. I have every confidence that you're going to think for a moment and then you're just going to go on and on.
Oh, God.
You will have so many that will come to you. It will be brilliant.
I mean, stop me if I start to ramble, but I think definitely for the second book, because it's about debutantes, but I was really kind of like starting to look at like the most famous debutante like ever, who was Brenda Fraser, so an American Depression era debutante. And then I read her like biography. A biography that's really, you know, quite like heartbreaking. But then it also just sort of shows the sort of abuse there. But then it was just interesting to see the people behind the debutantes, like the mothers and the publicists, and what they were getting out of that system. But then I think probably what maybe changed the story was reading more about people on the periphery. And then it was that thing that changed like who I wanted my character to be, in terms of like having someone who's an outsider but possibly has something to gain from it. And then I think when I was writing The Rebels, it was maybe a case of like I did so much research that I actually just had to stop, because you could literally spin hundreds of stories out of everything that was happening during that time period. And I think it's just so easy to just get overwhelmed by like how much you can find out.
Lucy, you look like you might have an idea in your head. What to say?
No. I think there were probably little things. So I'm fortunate because I'm writing strictly in one period, and I've got a master's in it. So I kind of have done all the research. So, you know, I'm set. But but so it's the little things, and actually it's so it was things like realizing that when Mrs. Wood first comes to London has to happen at a certain point. And then it's more about the backstory. So it's more about kind of, I had to, because of the birth of spiritualism kind of is really from the sisters in America, the Fox sisters. Sorry, I haven't been out for a really long time. And because they happened at a particular time, it meant that Mrs. Wood's mother couldn't. Anyway, it was timings, and so I had to shift things around and move things around. So it's more. I think the bones of the story never changed. Well, they did change, but they changed for editorial reasons. But in terms of like the historical stuff, it's more the details I think that it affects. So yeah, shifting timescales. I think that's probably.
Difficult talking without spoilers, isn't it?
Yes, sorry.
Welcome to my show. Alex.
Yeah, I would say for me, I completely agree with what both of you said. I had similar experiences. I think for my book, so the context, for anyone who hasn't read The Queen of Fives, is it's the story of a con woman who is running a swindler's emporium, if you like, that has been in operation for about 100 years. And times are quite tight. And so she's about to embark on her most audacious scheme yet to infiltrate this very, very wealthy, strange, eccentric family in Berkeley Square. And what I needed from a research perspective was real life examples of real life 19th century fraud. What would Quinn's methods be? How would she be lifting these fortunes? What kind of bonds and stock options would she be dangling on her imaginary market? What were her promissory notes actually saying? And so I spent quite a lot of time looking at particularly American examples of late 19th century fraud. But the problem with that is after a while you start to be like, oh, it's a bit gross, because at the end of the day, it is fraud. It's not, it's a tricky one. And I think what I found quite quickly was I needed to work out what's the moral code that Quinn is working to, and what's the sort of wider framework that the chateau has adopted for itself. What are the rules? And so actually I had to sort of set the research aside. And the book changed because I realised quite quickly I needed to write that rule book and work out what does Quinn say she's allowed to do and not allowed to do? Who is she allowed to mark and why? And what conditions need to be in place for that to be the perfect con? And what are the moves, the sequential moves she has to go through? Almost like a dance, that if they're not followed in the right order, then she's just being crass, she's just being gauche, and she's just being immoral. And so actually the real change to the story was I've got the research, I know what she could do and how she could do it, but who cares? So what? What's the point of it? So it became a sort of finding a different emotional and moral complexity to the story that I maybe hadn't expected I was going to need to find.
Do you know, that's really interesting because I hadn't realised it, but Mrs. Wood and Quinn are doing the same thing. Yeah. And that what you're talking about, that moral crisis, I suppose, when you realise that what they're doing is morally bankrupt. That was a real turning point for me when I was writing the book, and I think that's when I finally understood Mrs. Wood, because how do I present to you, which is what the difficulty you have with Quinn, how do I present to you a character that you're going to want to spend time with who has no morals and who is doing something which is really, really offensive, and you have to make it right in your character's head, that you have to, with Mrs. Wood, it was like making her, she had her own boundaries, she knew what she was doing, but she also reasoned it to herself. And then once you believe that as the author, as the writer, then it's fine. But yeah, that moment where I had that, oh my God, I'm writing about a really awful person. And I didn't know that. And also, that she's dealing with her, this isn't a spoiler, but, she's working with someone who is a lot younger than her, and she's got to then confront her and they're going to have a difficult, maybe ishy relationship. And it's like, how do you have like a grown woman coming up to 40 having an iffy relationship with, not an iffy relationship, conflict with a girl of 16, so yeah, it's the moral thing. Actually, I think I agree with you. Those two things turned my story. Sorry, Charlie.
That's fine. That's absolutely fine.
Nothing to do with research. Everything to do with kind of the.
It's still about your book.
Yes, it still is about the book. Yeah.
It's absolutely fine. Alex, you said, "Who cares?" I would like to use that and move on from it. What have you learned? And I suppose again, Alex, having published book 2, you guys working on book 2, about your knowledge of what readers want and your readers, how has that improved over time?
Ooh, that's a really good question.
Interesting.
Who do you want?
Do you want to go first?
Shall I go first?
Yeah, you go first.
I have realised actually what my weaknesses are as a writer, and I think all readers want this thing I was not good at doing, which is reveals and the timing of them. And I heard an author say, it was Brandon Sanderson, saying what you need to remember is a reader needs that premise, and then they need a sense of progress through the story, which is that satisfaction that comes, and I know this feeling, of getting pieces of information at the right pace, at the right time, that either line up with what you were expecting or change your expectation. And then there needs to be a payoff at the end. And actually, I really have realised if you hold those things in mind, all these very complicated story structures and 3-act structures and 55-act structures all start to melt away. It's that sense of what's the premise, what's the progress, what's the payoff. And I only heard it really on a podcast, a couple of weeks ago, but it really struck me that actually that is something that I didn't get. I was always trying to look for what's the right way to structure a whole novel, what do plays do, what do films do, what are the beats, what does the Save the Cat book say, how do I go into the woods, what's a folk tale doing? And I was just getting myself in a real muddle. And actually, it's just that sort of core reader experience. You just need to sort of keep it simple and yet complex enough that it works and it's engaging, which is, I think, that for me is the hardest thing to do. And I think that's what people at the same time need.
So it's all that work that has made The Queen of Fives so successful then?
Yeah. I think mine is to make it shorter. That's what...
It's the longest book, I think, out of all of you guys, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't...
No filler, though. Absolutely no filler.
No filler. Every single word is scintillating and needs to be there.
It's true. It's very true.
But yeah, no, I think I had always had a problem with writing really short books. Not that they were ever published, but like for myself. And so I was really excited that it was 100 and it was longer, so you're lucky. But it was like 137 at some point. And so I was really proud of it. But then, yeah, I have had like, it's really long, but it's really good.
Can you blurb your own book? It's scintillating.
Yeah, it's scintillating. It's long, but it's good.
Oh God, I feel like with me, it's like sometimes I like my characters to be a mystery, and so when I was going through edits with my agent and my editor, and then even when I was doing the Curtis Brown course, which I highly recommend, I just remember the feedback I got was just sort of like, you know, you don't have to have the characters wear their hearts on their sleeves, but like give the reader enough so that they feel connected to the character and that they want to follow them through the journey of the book. And then I think to maybe bring it back to like historical research as well, like I think the thing I have to tell myself every time is that people are people, like no matter what century they live in. And so with that, I think especially with the second book, it's like try not to wear my research like too kind of like heavily, and like creating this historical setting but then giving the characters room to sort of breathe. So yeah, I think that's the biggest thing I've learned, but I'm sure like there's hundreds of stuff I'll learn along the way, especially when I go through edits again.
You'll absolutely keep on learning and improving. I would like to take us back to our kind of collective recent past here. Lucy, you said about deadlines and not having worked to one previously. Can I ask you all, how has having a deadline changed you in that way and changed how you write or what you do? If there's things that can be said that we haven't already said already.
Well, I didn't hit mine, so I'm not the person to ask.
You were still working towards one though.
Yeah, no, I am now. And I think, your deadlines are tight. They're tighter than mine, because you're more committed now. I don't know. I think it changes everything. I think, you can't just noodle around. You're now a professional writer, and it's game changing.
Completely different like mindset. Like I didn't hit my deadline either, and like I remember at the time I was so confident, like when I got my deal that, I'm going to have like book 2 done by this time, and then book 3 and then book 4. And then I feel like life gets in the way, because I think it's one thing to write a book before you get the deal, but then afterwards it's that thing, it's a professional commitment, but then you also have your work, and then it's that thing, you also have your personal life. So it's trying to balance it. And then I realised, I think in 2023, it was like when you're sort of coming close to burnout. So it's like, it's just really like trying to find the balance. And so, it's like, I feel like I've lost track of the question. But
That's what deadlines do to
I
you.
know. I feel like I'm one of those people, like I really procrastinate. And so sometimes with deadlines, like if I'm confident with what I'm doing, I can hit it. But then I think with book 2, like it's that thing, it's like when you're still trying to figure it out, but then you also have, extra voices in your head, like your agent, your editor, your reader. And sometimes you need this moment of like, or like for me, months of like sort of pure silence to just figure out the story that you yourself want to tell, and then you can kind of get started. And I think for some authors, they're lucky, they're able to kind of shut out that external noise and like really kind of get moving. But for some people, it takes a bit like longer to hit their stride, and I think that's the reason why people, you know, call book 2 like a real beast. Yeah.
But actually, your book 2 experience was slightly different to that, though, wasn't it? I mean, Alex is the king of deadlines. Like, you are. I've never missed a deadline. Can I just quickly say, this is not who I am. That's why I found it quite surprising. I'm a complete geek, but you're the king of them.
Well, I think I had a slightly different experience, possibly, in that, and this might be a bit of how the sausage is made answer if it's too much detail, but the Housekeepers and the Queen of Fives actually were both sold on one book deals. So I was under no pressure when the books were done to then deliver the next. That pressure was coming entirely from me. So I finished the copy edits on the Housekeepers on a Friday, and I'd already started planning and sort of sketching the beginning of book 2, and I dived into the first draft on that Monday, and I was fueled entirely by fear, because I just felt as though I've wanted this all my life, not to sound very dramatic, but I really, really wanted to be published, and it was a real lifetime ambition, and my dream has always been the authors I love the most just have a really great backlist, and they have a really nice long bookshelf of books. And I was like, that is what I want. So I cannot stop. I've got to go immediately. And actually, I started book 2 a bit too quickly. And that's the reason why that first 10,000 words was just a bit scary, because it wasn't quite cooking. And I think Stacey is absolutely right. You just need some time sometimes. Just write, get it wrong, start again, rework it. But my deadlines were self-imposed. So I just said to myself, I really, really need to get this first draft done by X date. And come hell or high water, I'm going to do that. But I remember writing the final pages of the very first draft, and I'd started a new job. And so I'd stopped writing for a couple of months while I was getting my feet under the desk on that. And I came back to the manuscript, and I was just working away on it. And I remember I was like, I can't even see the screen. I mean, this is a bit intense. Like, I'm so exhausted. I'm so tired. And like, I'm peering at my sort of laptop screen and just trying to get the words down. And I think that is a sign that I was like, just like too intense. Like, come on, chill out. Yeah. And I think I'm really glad actually that I did push myself, but that was just coming from me. So book 3, which I'm writing now, is the first time I've been writing with a deadline, and I'm working on the first draft, but it's to a contracted deadline. And it's actually weirdly much calmer, because it's not like me whipping myself, because I know someone is actually waiting for it. And I think for me, there's been a real shift in feeling a sense of, okay, actually, when I deliver, it is going to go to my editor. She is going to read it. And that's a very special relationship and sort of feeling and knowledge that will happen. I just didn't have that in book 2. And it was quite lonely. So yeah, in a way, I sort of love a deadline now. Like, hooray, because it makes me feel safe. More deadlines.
Normally, that's the only way that I can write, because I'm a total procrastinator too, and I will only. Unlike my homework, I will literally do it 2 minutes before it needs to be done. And obviously, you can't get 100,000 words out in like 2 minutes. Yeah. It's quite hard. Yeah. So I normally thrive on them. It's the only thing that stops me from I'm slightly obsessed with Hogwarts Legacy, the Xbox game at the moment. And it's the only thing that's going to stop me playing Xbox. So that's why I'm saying I'm so surprised that I haven't risen to the deadline thing. This isn't very exciting for people, isn't it? Talking about like a therapy session. Sometimes I'm really
We had that last time.
But the thing is, just being amongst you guys again just reminds me of the fact that writing is just so much fun. It is like when it's flowing, when it's going, and it's such it's such a privilege to be able to go into this other world, and it's like going on holiday. I remember I did actually have one therapist say to me once, do you think maybe you're not actually a writer, but you're just trying to escape reality?
Oh, God.
And it was such a crisis for ages. Like, oh, my God.
Tell me you sent her a link to your book when it published.
It was awful. Oh, but I am. I think we're all escape artists. I think, that was what's so wonderful. We're as much readers as we are writers. And, when you find that book and you get into it and you can't not get out of it again. Oh, I love that. And it's the same when you're writing it, you put on your character, and then off you go.
And it is quite hard to explain, isn't it, the compulsion to do it, because there's clearly in me some desire to get a whole book done. And I heard a lot of authors say, I really like having the book finished. And this moment of seeing it sitting in a pile, hooray, because that's what you're going for.
It's beautiful.
But actually, when you're in the weeds of a first draft, I don't know how you guys feel. I actually find that really hard when there's nothing there, especially when you're working without a plan. You're just really flying by the seat of your pants. And it's just the discipline of, okay, I don't really know what's going to happen in this scene. I'm just going to keep typing.
Oh, I love that.
And you're just typing. And there are days when you're right. It's like writing a novel is like going for a really long run every single day. And some days it's great and the pavement is flying away beneath your feet. And some days it hurts and you have to stop and you feel guilty and you can't quite predict what day it's going to be. But for whatever reason, you put your shoes on and go again the next day for some weird compulsive need to.
Having never run in my entire life. I think...
No, I was just going to say, like, I agree with what you've just said. And, like, I remember a Margaret Atwood quote, I've got it on a notebook, saying blank pages fill me with terror. And, like, sometimes that's how I feel, like, whenever I have a new draft, because it's that thing, it's like, I think when you're just really struggling and you know it's not good, or, like, you have something and it's okay, but then you know you can get something better, but then it's that thing you're trying to get to where you want it to be. And, like, I think that's the hardest when you're trying to push through. And then, like you said, like when you are like on a roll and everything's flowing and it just feels quite magical when you just feel like all the stuff coming together. And like, I just wish sometimes like the whole writing process would be like that all the time. But then, you do appreciate it more when you've had to really work to get to that bit. Because there's that sense of satisfaction.
But that thing though, where you walk into your characters will walk into a room and you know that you need them to get to there at the end of it, but you don't know how they're going to do it. I love that though, where you're just like, oh, he's wearing a brown belt. And, you kind of this world, it's like it starts to like open up and colour out, and then you know what the room looks like, and then, those kind of... So I really like... I like editing more because the hardest work has been done, but I love those moments of... It is, and going through the weeds is so true, but then those moments are like you go through the weeds and there's an amazing castle just there full of, it does. And, I remember with Mrs. Wood, just like the sensations of like watching her house come to life in my head and all of her friends, like I just knew I was going to have a scene with her circle and they just all walked in just like in their own individual ways. I was like, oh, right, so you're this and you're that and you're this. And then... Oh, I love that. It's like making friends where you don't actually have to leave the house.
So I think this fits in here, especially with your experience now. What do you most enjoy about being an author?
Yeah.
I feel like I enjoy like when I get to the end of a draft writing the end, because because it's that thing, it's like, yes, you've made it after all those like months of like self-doubt and like what feels like torture. And then I feel like with you, Lucy, I love the editing process because you have the structure, but then it's sort of like, I feel like sometimes it's my chance to be like a smart aleck because I can go through and be like, okay, this wasn't right, but this is how I can make it better. And so I feel like I'm sort of like wagging my finger at like the old version of Stacey, just like, oh, you should have done this in the first place. So yeah, I think I love that. And then just meeting like other authors like Lucy and Alex and, realising that there's these wonderful people who are writing all these amazing stories and then you just feel like you're just part of this other world.
Yeah, I think that's true. It's I think I said this earlier on. It's like you've got permission to be to disappear, but then you've also got permission to connect with other people that get it and understand. But also, I don't know. It's what I always dreamed of being and having, and it's like I don't really think about myself as an author though. Yet. I still feel like an absolute fraud. A
lot of people say that though. It's interesting because from where I'm sitting, and I think where you guys are sitting too, I'm thinking, how on earth do you not? You're amazing.
I feel the same, and it's like I just remembered when I got my publishing deal, I was so shy about telling people, And then when it was published, like I still feel shy about it because I feel like I need to wait until book 2 is out. But then probably once that's out, I'll be like, okay, I need to wait until like book 5 has been published and I can call myself a proper author. So it always feels like there's another hurdle to climb. But then maybe, I don't know, maybe it's that thing, maybe it's good because that way you don't really get complacent. And you still, I feel like with me, when I feel like I have something to prove, then it just makes me challenge myself a lot more, I guess. And also, it's so hard to get published. So I think it's that sense that I don't take it for granted because, you know, not every book you write will be published. So I feel like for me, when it is, it's like, yeah, it's wonderful.
I completely agree with that. And actually, I think, Stacey, you have just said for me what is both the best and worst thing about the whole thing, which is when you have written a book and you have a book, you have a thing that you've produced, you've created it, and it's your imagination on the page and you've put so much of yourself into it. And I don't know about you, but I get a real tangible sense of just joy holding it. I always like hold it, like hooray you, good for you. Not myself, the book. But at the same time, that means then instantly you do move your goalposts, because if you are the kind of person who wants to sort of generate something and make something, then of course you then want to make the next thing. And you're always thinking about, okay, what's a structure I haven't tried? What's a narration I could do that would be really scary for me? How do I do first person this time? What's a different setting? What if I do a different time period? And then I think that's a really creative and energizing journey. The risky thing is then you start going down the road of what does the market need and want and expect? How do I mold towards it? Am I okay? Am I good enough? How am I comparing? What are my sales figures? And all that stuff I think is inevitable. And I think actually I heard someone say there's writer you and there's author you. Author you is the person who meets your deadlines, who or doesn't, or negotiates them very professionally, who emails your editor and your publicist and is professional and easy and nice to deal with. Author you is the person who comes out and talks about the book. And author you is someone who builds an ecosystem of friends and peers and colleagues and a real sense of community. But writer you is still you. It's sort of child you. It's the inner you. And you need to keep listening to that voice and putting that voice on the page. And that's quite exposing, quite scary and quite weird. But that's what you're doing actually at the keyboard, at your laptop. It's your brain, your fingers, your screen, and you. And I think actually that's the most wonderful thing is when you do start doing it professionally. There are moments where you're like, oh, I'm a real round peg in a round hole at this moment. This is what I'm supposed to be doing with my time. And there's nothing like that feeling. But it comes with fear. So it's the best and worst thing.
Yeah.
I agree.
Yeah.
That's fascinating and really wonderful. Yeah, it's a really interesting insight. So, yeah, I'm going to bring this in here. And if we end up talking about your next books, then cool, okay. And we'll go back to another question or whatever. So, Alex, you said about point of views. Lucy, I believe you have, I've got to check my notes here. So, yes, you have written in third person.
Yeah.
And also with your newspapers and your columns and things with Mrs. Wood, you have written effectively in the first person.
Yeah.
Alex, you've written in the third person, I believe, in both books. And Stacey, you've written in the first.
Yes.
So you probably know what I'm going to ask. Do you think you will change that up a bit and write in different persons?
No. There are books I've read in the third person that I've absolutely loved. But I feel like for me, when I write that, maybe because sometimes it's hard for me to get into the interiority of the characters. So first person, for me, it's the easiest way because, from the moment I start writing, it feels a lot more personal. And I think because when I've just tried writing other stuff from the third person, it just feels so stale and so distant. It's painful for me to read. It's painful when I ask my friends to read it. So I've just never say never. I've just never been able to make it work for me.
I think I always used to write in the first. But I couldn't write Mrs. Wood in the first because we need to have a bit of distance from her because we can't, it would just change it did. I wrote the first 10,000 words in first. So for me, getting into third was a real challenge because I was so far away in third that it was they were just moving around down here but then I got closer and closer and closer, and then I think it's all right. But someone said to me that it's in real close third, and I don't really, I think I don't know. Is it? I guess it is, but it's probably the closest to first that it possibly could be. But now in the book that I'm writing now, it will still be in third. And I feel uncomfortable about the idea of going back to first, because then it feels too personal perhaps for my characters, or too intrusive. Maybe I quite like to have that little bit of a barrier between them. I don't know. It's interesting.
I'm really surprised because I just remembered when I was reading your book, like it read like it was in first, because I just felt so close to Mrs. Wood and like what she was thinking and feeling. And then maybe with me, when I write in third, I can never get to there.
It took time.
Yeah.
It took a lot of time to get from here to there.
You'll have to give me some tips then.
It was literally just write. It's like, it's how you get anywhere with it. You just have to keep writing it and keep writing it and keep writing it. And also just share snippets with a friend who'll be honest with you as well when you're writing it.
I could talk about this all day. I love.
If we all got a few hours, Sorry.
And all night and forevermore. So, yes, I would write in first person. I am writing in first person actually in my new book. In one point of view, I've got 3 points of view, and one of them is first.
Oh, that's interesting.
And I did it because I have written first person before, but never published in it. And I thought, well, let's just give it a go and push myself and see if I can this time. And there's plot reasons why I think it will work better for that narrative voice to have it. I actually feel much, much closer, sort of building on what you were both saying, I feel much closer to the character when I'm writing in third. And it's really interesting the way, this is for people who are listening to this, you can't see, everyone sort of lifted their arm and talked about being really far away from the page and the character. And that's exactly how I feel about it. It's that sort of swooping in thing. And I think what third person allows you to do is go several layers deeper than the character themselves can see.
Agree.
And you try and find reactions or tics that will surprise the reader and snag the reader, that shows there's something else going on, several layers, sort of those subterranean layers psychologically. And for me, that means I get much deeper into sort of weird people. So and first person doesn't really allow me to do that. First, you can only go as far as that person will let you go, and you're limited. But you can be much more confessional. You can be much more emotional. But it's whatever that character's allowing you to see. Whereas third just gives me all the excavation joy I'm after. So it's interesting. Yeah,
you can use tone with it. However. But you're absolutely right. When you're in first person, no dissing to first person, by the way. But when you're in first person, they're always an unreliable narrator.
Yeah.
And as I say, I always used to write in it. Never thought I would ever be able to do third or wanted to do third. But actually, the freedom that it gives you, because you also, I don't do this, but you can't as much. But you can kind of move the camera slightly when you're in the third. Whereas in first, you can only experience it through that person's eyes.
I feel like I'm convinced now to maybe give it a
try. Just keep writing. And I'll tell you, if you send it to me, I'll tell you when you've actually got in there.
Can I bring a completely self-indulgent question in here?
Yeah,
Have any of you ever considered, or would you ever consider, and I suppose if not, why not? Or if yes, why?
I'm so intrigued by what this question is going to be.
I hope it's all right. The second person, because I love the second person. I think it's interesting to get your opinion on it.
Someone said that something in mine was written in second person. I think maybe one of the letters. I don't know.
I would believe that, yes. That was very possible.
So I've done it, so I don't need to answer this.
Yeah. I think I have read a few things in the second person, and I can't remember who the author was, but I remember really enjoying it, and it felt really personal. I don't know, it's just I've never tried it, but maybe it's I won't rule it out. I'll give it a try to see. Maybe I need to dig out my copy of that book again. I think it was called The Thing Around Your Neck, and I'm pretty sure it was the second person. But yeah, it's never occurred to me, because I think it usually just seems like it's either the first or the third, and then the other points of view, they don't really come in. But then when I have read books, even the omniscient narrator, there is something about it that just feels really different. But yeah.
Yeah, I'm totally the same as Stacey. I would give any tense a go. And I think actually second is, again, I think, did you say before, it's tone choices? And I think the wonderful thing about first, second, third is it's just all tools in the toolbox. And then there's sort of categories within it. And it's just learning, okay, what do I need to make the reader feel either wrong-footed or satisfied or excited or interested? And what's the best angle camera lens to get that across? So yeah, any and all.
I have to say though that
I'm glad you're coming in for an answer.
I'm going to punch a pipe in again anyway.
Yeah.
I probably wouldn't, but only because when I'm reading in second, and this is no shade on second at all, it's just I'm not. I spend the whole time thinking, are they talking to me or are they talking to that person, or is that, and I'm tussling with it the whole time, and I think I find it hard enough getting a plot together to kind of to then kind of but yeah, anyone who can write in second and do it well, that's a talented person, which apparently I am, because I did.
Yeah.
I didn't even know it.
Quite right, yeah. Very good.
Well, I think we could go on for a while, but I've looked at the time and I think we're going to have to start wrapping this. I can't believe how the time's gone.
Sorry.
So, yeah.
We talked a lot about deadlines as well.
Yeah. So, before we ask our lovely audience here for their questions, because I think that's going to be great. They're going to have some wonderful things for you, I expect. Alex, I'm going to start with you. You've done 24 hours in the housekeeper. I've wanted to ask this question for a year, so please, I've been looking forward to asking this. 24 hours in the housekeepers, 5 days you've done in the Queen of Fives. Where do you go to next?
Ooh.
Well, the housekeepers, there's a couple of timelines going on there.
True.
I'm not done with it. I'm not done with 24 hours. I love a really tight timeline. And the biggest stretch for me in the future will be to do something multi-generational, like huge, many decades, epic. Yeah, that's for book 4. Come on. But yeah, no, I like a really tight timeline, so I will stay in that zone.
Okay. And so on that basis, then I'm going to bring it back to book 3. What can you tell us at this point?
Book 3 is another opulent. So basically, I was joking with my editor that I feel like the core story I will always want to write is big house, bad family. And that gives you lots of room to play with. So it's another big, opulent building with a large and complicated cast within it and a definitely dark mystery at the heart of the plot. And I am spinning, peeling, unpeeling, finding my way into that as we speak.
Fascinating. Stacey?
Yes.
How are your debutantes doing?
They're doing well. I feel like, yeah, I was sort of lost in just all the research because so much has come up. So I won't spoil it, but debutantes and also Marjorie Anningham, if you can believe it as well, because she had something to do with them too. So yeah, so exciting things I've dug out of the archives that, yeah, I'm weaving into the story.
Lucy, I think we've got a particular year for you, haven't we? 1908?
Yep.
What else can you tell us?
5 days in August 1908, and women are at the centre of it. And in those 5 days, those women will have what they think they believe turned on their heads and see the world in a completely different way. But it'll be funny. And there will be... No, I'm not going to say anything more than that.
Okay, so we will laugh. Yeah.
You will laugh, and if you don't, I'll cry. Yeah, no, it's full of sunshine, bit of drizzle. It is England after all.
Yeah.
Okay. Lou, can I ask you to get this microphone for us? Does anyone have any questions for our wonderful authors here? Lou, do you have a question?
Oh, God.
Adrian, okay. Adrian's all the way back there. If we can take the microphone. No, take it. Hang on. You've got to.
Obviously, you're writing all these characters in your books, and I'll be honest, I've never read them. So, I'm not. I'm more of a.
Thanks.
Give me a manual about a tank, and I'll be fine. But in the characters you write about, is there anything of you in the characters that you write? Quirks or...
Ooh, I feel like maybe because I write in the first person, there is, even though, I'm not a witch or a witch hunter, but with my book, it starts off with the main character, like he's illegitimate, so when his brother dies, he steps into his brother's place and like takes his role. And then I'm like a twin, and like even though we're not identical, we sound the same. So, you know, sometimes we would, when we were younger, we would call our mother and like, you know, badmouth each other to see like what the reactions, and we do that with our friends. And like, so I think that experience of maybe stepping into someone's shoes kind of like, you know, however briefly, like fed into the plot. And so it was kind of good to like kind of play with it, but like in a really sort of, you know, dark way.
Yeah. I think there's always a part of you in every character that you write. But the difficulty is, I think, since I was a teenager and writing like terrible, kind of like miserable stories about terrible things happening, there has to be light and shade with your character. And so whilst there is an element of me in Mrs. Wood, I think probably her frustration with just having to socialise. I think yeah. And also, I don't know, I think you get so close to them and then you have to not like them in certain respects as well, that, I don't know, I think a tiny bit, but not, I think you have to separate from them. That was a really good answer, wasn't it? Sorry.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I would say there's no biographical details that are me. There's no character that's my age or gender or lives in anywhere I've lived in my books. But there's definitely the emotional stuff. And I do two things, I suppose, you know, with a protagonist like Quinn in this book, I'm trying to give her all the characteristics that I wish I had. So real social confidence, the ability to go into any room, anywhere and be absolutely fine, the kind of gumption and bravery and loyalty that she holds, the sense of leadership, and the compassion that she has for the people around her. Those are all qualities I admire and would like to have. But I also give her all the things that I know I do have, such as, you know, envy and being bad-tempered and occasionally quite difficult to deal with and annoying. Those, you know, that's just you being honest on the page and trying to find something that feels real and a bit more complicated or difficult. And I think you just inevitably pull on yourself. And that's the stuff you put on the page and have to be truthful about. So yeah, there's loads of me in there.
And I think also that there you are going to come into it because you're also giving your characters opinions, and of course, you know, who they are will influence that opinion. But there are certain things that you know, I think you do. You will always come into it, but then you always write so many characters that I think it's only probably your protagonist that you are able to do that with. Or maybe we sneak in ourselves as a little sub-character and we don't even realise that we're doing it.
Yeah.
Mrs. Hart in my book does come in complaining about her kids, so that probably is me.
Another Lou?
Oh, I have a question too, actually.
Okay, and then the lady there. Yep, go for it, Lou.
Yeah, okay. Do you hide any secrets in your books that only a few people will know?
That's an awesome question.
I have a friend who loves ABBA, and she writes historical fiction. She hides ABBA lyrics in her books.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh, God, I have to ask you who it is.
It's Fran. It's my friend Fran.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, my God.
Yeah, she does. Sorry, what was the question apart from about ABBA? Do we hide anything?
Do you hide any secrets in your novels that only a few people will know? Like little Easter eggs or anything, you know?
Yeah, I hide Easter eggs for my friends so that they'll...
Do you use other people's names that they'll recognise and go, oh, friends' names and stuff?
Sometimes it might just be a phrase or something that a friend uses, or perhaps, you know, like an item of clothing or something. Yeah, I want to make my friends laugh and make sure I know they've read it.
Yeah. I don't feel I hide Easter eggs, but probably like with people I know, you know, good and bad, like I borrow some of their sort of quirks and personality. So if anyone's listening, it's like, yeah, it's all the good characters are you. And like, yeah, if I don't like you, then, well. But I changed the name, so yeah.
Yeah, I definitely do. I took, mainly to try and make my husband laugh, so I took some lines from Gemma Collins and put them in The Housekeepers. And I have an entire exchange from Real Housewives of Beverly Hills, which I which I sort of reimagined and reworked and played with, and it's definitely in book 2. I don't know if it made it to the final draft, but you know when you're like, you just need to get through the book. It's like, how can I make this? Oh, what would,
I'm gonna do that.
I was like, what would Lisa Vanderpump and Lisa Rinna do here? Oh, that's what they would do. Let's go with that. So yeah, I've got quite a lot of that, but it smooths out. I don't know if any of it stays, but yeah, on the way.
Oh, that's so good. I need to do that.
I mean, I listened to the audio and I'm like, now I'm wondering about the lines. Like,
You'd never find it.
Yeah.
You'd never find it.
Are we allowed to know?
Do
Do we have to work it out ourselves?
Yeah. Otherwise, it's not a secret, right?
Yeah.
The lady at the back had a question, Lou.
Do any of your characters ever sort of walk into your lives? One of the other authors we listened to once, I can't remember who it was now, they were trying to just imagine one, and they said just suddenly they just seemed to walk into the kitchen when they were washing up, just there he is, he's there, and he could see them.
Yeah, all the time.
yeah, I feel like when I was writing The Rebels and then I got to halfway through and like I was just really struggling to continue, and then this like side character Beth, she just like walked, like she just came to me, and it's like I immediately knew who she was and what she sounded like. And I remember like, you know, finishing off the chapter and like interweaving her story. And yeah, it's funny how it just like they can just come into your head. And then also sometimes it's not characters, but maybe like a sentence that I'll come up with, and then I'm like, oh, that's quite good, and then I'll jot it down.
Yeah, I had that with sentences. I had
Yeah.
the first line of the book, apart from the article. I was driving down the 303.
Oh.
And I was like, quick, get in the phone. But yeah, no, I do. Like all my sub-characters are like that. I'm just sitting. I'm writing generally when it happens. And I don't know how many people are going to walk into the room, but that's whoever needs to walk in will walk in and sit down and start doing their thing, I suppose.
Yeah, I 1,000% agree with that. I in this book, Quinn's faithful lieutenant, who's probably my favourite character in this book, Mr. Silk, who is a bold, cantankerous, punctilious, but lovely man. I just could see him completely and immediately, and I could sort of feel his energy. So he came immediately, but I completely agree with what Lucy just said. The joy, particularly when you're drafting, is you just throw yourself into this room, and whoever presents themselves, like a seance. And actually, that's the joy of it. And I think there's two things that happen. For me, it's either I can visually see them, what they're wearing, what they look like. That's quite rare. Or it's just the emotional energy. It's like the vibe, basically. Yeah. And for a protagonist, actually, and I'd never thought about this until just now, I almost never see them, or see them at the very end or in the course of the final edits, have to give them hair colour and eye colour, because I really don't see that at all. I just see their sort of mood and their tone of voice. And to go right back to what Stacey said at the very beginning, most scenes begin with friction and conflict. So it's usually their tone of voice and how they argue and whether they fight cleanly or not. And it's that stuff that I think presents itself to me first.
Yeah, no, I'm the same as well.
I completely agree about so a friend of mine who's a screenwriter, we were talking about how if she imagines an actress or an actor or in her head when she's writing when she's writing a screenplay, and she said no, and I was like, well, that's good. Like, I feel a bit reassured because I can't imagine. Some people have pictures of characters on their walls, you know, based on. I can't do that at all. Like, you know, I have no idea what Mrs. Wood looks like. I know what she feels like, but because I'm looking through her eyes when I'm writing and seeing the world, like it'll be like me just talking and then saying, and I'm blonde with blue eyes.
Yeah, like I don't really focus on like what the characters look like, except maybe to just the basic requirements. But then I feel like it's so weird because like when you're writing in the first person, I struggled with it because it's that thing like I was writing a male character. So it's like, you know, unless you have him standing in front of the mirror.
I was going to say, I looked in the mirror and I stroked my beard.
Yeah, it's that thing. It's like, it's hard to sort of do without sometimes it coming across as a bit obnoxious. And I think like there was this Twitter account called Men Who Write Women, and so you see like snippets from books where men are describing like female attributes in their books that just is really, I recommend it, but it was just so, sometimes you're just like, how did this get approved? But I feel like for me, it's that thing I kind of step away and try to let the readers imagine like what the characters look like based on like, you know, how they sound.
Yeah. I mean, I think for physical presence, I'm aware of I'm aware of all of my characters' physical presences, how, you know, their size. And I think also because just going back to the point where you were talking about whether or not we're in there, like our characters are in there, I know that Mrs. Wood's experience of getting older and feeling less, that her relevance is slipping. I'm aware of that. You know, I'm a woman who's getting much older. And, you know, I didn't publish the book until I was 48. And so I want to kind of, I wanted to share that. And I do share that with Mrs. Wood. So there are parts of who I am and my experience in the world that transcends kind of time and history, you know. And yeah, where was I going with that? It's going down a line here.
Physical presence, you say.
Yeah.
Physical presence, just sharing, I don't know. Anyway, but you know, I think, you know, you write about women, you write about men. I will always just write about women though, because men very rarely feature in any of my books. They're just side hustles.
God. Yeah. I mean, my second book has women in it, but like, yeah, I think it just depends on the story I'm writing and stuff. But yeah.
I think we're going to have to ask, has anyone got a question?
I was just interested in how you're talking about the start, about the language of your characters, particularly Stacey, when you're talking about very historical contexts for the language and how perhaps you're thinking within that language. Does that start to sort of alter the way you see things as your external person in your life? And does the language start to perhaps make you think more about, you know, the current context of our lives and so on? So it's about the language and inhabiting that language and how it might affect you, you know, as you're writing.
Yeah, I mean, I have to like a disclaimer, like I grew up on period dramas, and so when I was younger, like when I was like a child, like with my sister, we sort of put on like that sort of period language speech as a joke, and so I've always been drawn to that type of language. And then I think when I was a teenager, I really loved sort of commercial like books, and so I wasn't really focused on language. And then it was only a bit later that I really got into, you know, Shakespeare, and then, you know, Maggie O'Farrell, where it's like these really, and Hilary Mantel, where it's these really beautiful, elaborate sentences, and like her words just seem like so perfumed. And so I feel like for me, like when you look at the past, like people had such a beautiful way of expressing themselves, and with my writing, like I'm trying to sort of, you know, get to that. And obviously with The Rebels, I had more room to play because it's set in the 17th century, so I could be slightly more descriptive. And then with the 1950s, where I'm writing now, I'm still trying to get to that beauty, but then obviously make it a bit more stripped back because it's more modern. And then maybe I feel like in real life, like, you know, when I'm going for walks or I notice something, like I'm sort of trying to look for like a unique angle, and like even when I'm writing, just like a unique way of describing things. And so I feel like it's probably just made me like more open to like different forms of, you know, inspiration. So, you know, books, but like plays, and like going to museums, and like just listening to like, you know, artists, like not just writers, but like artists and photographers, and hearing how they describe the world, because that can like be very inspiring as well. It just makes me see things in a different way. And I remember I interviewed Monica Ali, who's amazing, and she just said, you know, as a writer, you have to be open to the world. And like, I really took that with me, because it's that idea, like, you can't just be in a bubble, like, you know, you need to live, like, it can't just be writing, like, it needs to be everything else. And I think once you do that, it really kind of, you know, changes you as a person.
The lady at the back.
I was just interested in the relationship with your editors and how you find your editor, because obviously it's got to be somebody that has a sympathetic view and is going to enhance your vision for your book rather than take it off into their vision.
I think you've hit the nail on the head, though, with the last thing that you said, which was that it's really important that they share the vision with you. So I think all three of us would have had the same experience, which is, you know, you have an agent, and then when your book is beautiful and shining, it goes out to editors, and your agent will probably have spoken and identified editors that she thinks will, or he thinks will be the best fit. And then hopefully one of those editors will agree, and you know, and I think it's about that personal connection, isn't it, with your editor? Yeah. You have to have an editor who really does believe in the book and loves it. So I think.
Okay. Yeah, I think what Lucy said is spot on. It's all about that trust, and for both my books, I've worked with two editors at the same time, one in the UK and one in the US, and they come together to share joint notes, first of all, on what they think needs to be changed or considered. And that's always a conversation. It's not a sort of, this is the list of stuff you've got to do. It's a reaction as a reader. This is what we think works or doesn't work. But when I think about my relationship with them, when I think about working with Frankie, who's my editor at Headline in the UK, she has an ability to go into the book, into the world of the book, and open doors and see dimensions that I just have not seen. And you then have this incredible realization that someone else is there with you in the story, which sounds a bit like tra-la-la, but it's very special. And Melanie, my US editor, just has this extraordinary ability to see the framework of a story, what's too fast, what's too slow, but what's the sort of underlying. It's almost like you have someone who's an amazing architect who can see that your walls there's nothing load bearing there. The roof is about to fall in. What are you doing? Mm-hmm. And she just kindly but consistently and carefully just helps me see the structure and framework of that house. And it's just incredibly special. It's a real privilege actually to work with people who are so good, so good, and are such incredible readers with such strong instincts. But you're always reminded it's your book, so it's a collaboration process.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. And I would just say with my editor, Katie, she was amazing. And I remember from the very first meeting when she was offering from my book, I think what struck me was that she really wanted to see how we would work together. And so I knew that, when I went with her, that she was the type of person when she gives me feedback, she's not expecting me to basically just say yes to everything. She wants me to challenge, if she suggests something and I don't quite think it's right, then I can go back and I felt, empowered to make those changes. And I think often with publishing, there can sort of be a power imbalance, I think, especially when you first start, because I feel like there's this need to please everyone. And I felt like with my editor, it was very much, we're a team, but this is your book, and she wants to help me to write the best book possible. And so I definitely felt empowered throughout my time working with her. And if there was something I didn't agree with, then I didn't have a problem in basically going back and saying, basically just telling her what I felt was the best thing to do. And I think that's the most important thing about an editor, just having someone you trust. But having someone you trust.
Sorry, I don't understand.
I'll go back and explain that.
Oh God. Have we got any more questions? Preferably from humans. Okay, the lady here.
How do you decide what the cover's going to look like?
Oh, that's not us. Well, we have some say in it. It's not, that's the publisher. So, so they come up with the idea.
Have any input in that?
You can say if you like it or not.
Yeah.
I think with my US book imprint, I had conversations about the cover, and the cover did change. But this was, but the UK one, that was exactly what they came back with. There's just a few tweaks on it. But I think you do trust them as well because they know what they're doing.
So with my editor, she asked me to do a Pinterest board of inspirations, images and colours that I liked, and also book covers. But then I noticed she also added her idea, and the first idea was a taxidermied mouse, which is the cover in the rough. So it was actually very interesting. Like when we had a meeting about covers, that was her idea for the cover, and then she commissioned this wonderful designer Andrew. I can't remember his last name, but like he's amazing. And so it was just interesting with Katie, like from a very early stage, she had an idea of the cover she wanted, and it's definitely it was definitely something that I really loved too. And so I think the only choice was like what colour to go for, because I think I was given like 8 options, and but I did get kind of control over, like, I think having my name in gold, like on the hardback as well. Well, I think that might have been my agent Liza's idea. Yeah.
But you had an interesting thing, didn't you?
My covers have changed actually, sort of between hardback to paperback. So echo everything everyone else has said. And for book 2, my editor said, what are you seeing? What do you like? What would you like? What do you imagine? And I shared an answer to that. And I think out of that, it then becomes a sort of creative conversation about what's going to try and bring the spirit of the story across on the page. But then there's loads of commercial considerations that come into play. Colour is a really commercial consideration, because you're thinking about what works in retail, what works for the supermarkets versus Waterstones, what genre does this signal or not signal, and the same is true for fonts, whether you have a more illustrative cover, etc. I find it fascinating, but there's a whole covers committee at Headline, and I think it's a weekly meeting or regular meeting anyway.
It's like, and it's really interesting because my cover didn't really change that much from my hardback to that. In fact, the changes you probably wouldn't notice, but it's things like, so they were going for a more modern, because they were saying it's a slightly different historical fiction. And lots of them had been quite illustrative. They were saying, like, we want to go really like impactful. And then I think they thought, I think we might be missing some people. So for the paperback, they put in a little bit of kind of like illustrative, a bit more decorative to draw that. And I'll be really interested to see what they do for 2. But yours was so interesting because your hardback was almost, it was almost like a photo, wasn't it? It was like, and then you had this, I love your paperback.
Yeah.
That really illustrative. So did you have an input on that?
So no, that was a really glorious surprise created by Headline. And I think the thinking was so the Housekeepers, I want it to appeal to people who maybe read historical but wouldn't usually read crime. And I'd love crime readers who would never pick up something that wasn't contemporary to give it a go. And I think the objective then was to make the paperback feel fresh and give it a sense of narrative and story. So they created really gorgeous illustrated figures, people robbing the house, lights on in the windows. It's still really elegant and decadent and sort of upstairs, downstairs vibes that I was after, but it's just got a sense of movement to it. And I think that was the real focus. How do we create more story? So the first iteration of the paperback had a bit more, and then they kept pushing and pushing and pushing it, and ended on something that I adore the paperback for the Housekeepers. And of course, once you have a cover that really works, the conversation about book 2 is, okay, how do we make this congruent with the first book? Yeah. So book 2 is really a continuation of that vibe, but who knows what will happen in the future. But I love covers, obsessed. So not an expert at all.
I remember when the email came through saying, here's your cover, first draft. And I was like, oh my God, this is a thing I've been waiting for so long.
Yeah.
We were staying in an Airbnb because we were buying a house and wasn't ready. And it was all really, really stressful. And I was like, okay, no one say a word. This is the most important email of my life.
Yeah.
And then I thank God I loved it. But then that was not always an experience I had.
Yeah, no, it is exciting, especially like when you get the finished copies as well.
Yeah.
Or you can see it in person.
And you see the end paper. I mean, your end papers as well. But you see the end papers and you're just, it's glorious.
It's the dream, yeah.
It is the dream.
We should probably say that if anyone hasn't seen Alex's The Housekeepers in hardback, the end papers are a blueprint of the house. It's like a Cluedo board.
Paperback is as well, isn't it? You've got that on the inside of the...
We've got promo on the inside, actually, on the paperback, I think. But this is the genius of Patrick Insole at Headline, who just has an incredible vision for what a book can look like. And I never would have conjured in my own mind the way my books actually look. But I just love them. Yeah, I love my covers.
They're so lovely.
It's great.
Have we any more questions?
Who is your literary agent and how did you land them?
Let's go down the line.
Okay, yeah. So my literary agent is Liza de Block at Mushins Entertainment, And so I won a competition by Jessie Burton. And so it was basically for a membership to the London Library. And she, when I was like working on the first draft of the Rebels, and she just said, when I'm ready to submit to her agency. So I had that kind of in, and then I also submitted to other agents. But then I think when I met Liza, and like she really just got the book, and then what I found reassuring was that when she said, you know, if the first book doesn't sell, you know, we'll work on the second one. And if the second book doesn't sell, we'll work on the third. And she said, if it comes to book 10, then maybe we'll need to have a talk. But like, I've heard some horror stories. So that just reassured me that she was there for the long haul. And then I remember leaving the meeting, and then I was so tempted to go back to the office to be like, I'm going to take your offer. But then I was like, oh no, that would be weird. So I went home and I sent her an email an hour later just saying that I accept the offer. And yeah, and it's like, I think like this is someone who's been with me through, you know, thick and thin. And so I definitely feel I made the right decision.
Yeah, my agent is Alice Lutchens at Curtis Brown. And Alice was the judge of the Caledonia Novel Award, which was a competition I'd entered many times and never been longlisted, and then entered the Housekeepers because Alice was the judging agent that year. And I really knew Alice as a leader in the industry. She had an amazing track record and a really amazing list. I always say to people, the way I got an agent overall, though, was by reading an incredible blog by Christina Sweeney Baird, who wrote the novel The End of Men. I think it came out back in 2020. And I always signpost people towards this blog because she sets out in really transparent detail the spreadsheet that she set up, how she set it up, and what her process was for matching her queries to agents and managing the process. And it was incredibly helpful. And I followed it literally word for word, and always recommend it as a really good, professional and effective way to get your work out there when it's ready to go to agents.
So my agent is Lucy Morris, and she actually shares an office with your agent at Curtis Brown. And it's so interesting because all three of us got our agents through competitions, which is not the usual route. Normally it is years of submission and slogging. Yeah. But I entered the Curtis Brown First Novel Award back in 2019 because my friend Fran, who I've mentioned far too many times today, but her book is out tomorrow. So she told me I had to do it. So I did. I wrote 10,000 words for this competition of Mrs. Wood, which is pretty much the first opening seance. Is not but the first opening seance is pretty much what I entered. And I didn't win. I came second, and Lucy said, I want to represent you. And then I had to lie and say, oh God, she might listen to this as well. Oh well, we're beyond that now. I had to lie and say, she's like, how many words have you actually got written? And I was like, about 40,000. She's like, okay, that's great. And actually I had the 8,500 that I had submitted. Luckily lockdown happened. So I was able to kind of
We've all told that lie. Like I had a competition that it was a full manuscript read, and I think I had like 35,000 words.
Well, that's bigger.
Yeah, and then I had 5 days to finish it, and at the end I felt like a vampire because it was literally just writing like morning till night.
Oh God, that's so awful. Yeah. No, at least mine was a partial. Like they did say, it doesn't have to be completed because that. Oh.
Yeah.
You have to bet on yourself sometimes,
don't you?
I
know. I think I slept for a week afterwards.
Yeah. But my agent, and I don't know about yours, but my agent is a great editor as well. And she's, I signed with her in October 2019 and I sold Mrs. Wood in June 2022. And in that time, I submitted 2 full drafts and then it was smaller ones, but she just worked with me. And I remember saying to her, oh, for God, can't we just send it out to publishers now? I can't look at it one more minute. She's like, no, we need to go back and just make sure. And that process. But then it did mean that when it went to when my editor bought it, we did 1 round of edits and she didn't like what I'd done. So we just took it back to what it was before. So well, it wasn't she didn't like what she was done. What she realised was that her ideas were wrong.
I love that.
I think if we have one more question, if anyone has one. Gary, did you want to ask your phone if it has a kind of question for us? All right.
Oh, there's one more.
Hello. I was just wondering who your favourite authors are.
Always a good question.
Wow, it was an impossible question.
Oh my god, it's so hard to choose, but like I think Maggie O'Farrell, just because like I hadn't read her until like Hamnet came out, and then I read it and I loved it, and then I just went back to her entire like backlist, and like yeah, like she's definitely my favourite. Like she has so much range, but like her writing is like so strong in all of her books. So yeah, definitely her.
Alex?
It's an impossible question, but I think the writer I love the most, and our styles are not similar, but it's Ruth Rendell. I just think Ruth Rendell had the most extraordinary body of work ever. And I mean, this is another topic I could talk about all night long. I mean, her Barbara Vine novels in particular, I just think are masterclasses. And if I ever had to do a sort of thesis on something, I would really want to look at Ruth Rendell's books between sort of 1985 to 1995. I do not know how she was producing such exceptional, complicated, beautifully structured books every sort of 9 months or so without a dud at all for 10 years. And obviously amazing books on both sides of that as well. But that, to me, is just a period of a writer's career where you just see them. You know, people always say that phrase, or it was the writer at the height of her powers. That is serious powers. So yeah, I'm just a forever fan of Ruth Rendell. I think she was extraordinary.
I don't think I have a favourite author. I'm really indiscriminate about who and what I read. And so I think Janice Hallett is probably someone whose books I will always buy.
She's incredible.
Hers amazing. The Appeal. Like I read that overnight.
I've read that twice.
She's a genius.
She is a genius. But yeah, I'm really, it just depends on my mood. So, you know, I had a tough year, and so I'm reading a lot of cozy crime. So I'm quite into Richard Osman and that kind of thing. But then, you know, there are other years I was just saying that I'm quite into like femgore and horror at the moment, and which is a bit of a U-turn, whilst also reading Whitstable Pearl. I think when I was a kid, it was like Martin Amis. I remember surprising my teacher, sorry we talk about this, that I was also really into J.G. Ballard. And it was, must have been 12, and my English teacher said, "Oh, so what did everyone read over the summer?" And I was like, "I read J.G. Ballard's Empire of the Sun." And my English teacher was like, "Oh," and I said, "And a Harold Robbins."
Strong.
Because that was my
Strong
dad's
answer.
thing. I had no idea that, obviously it was saucy, but I didn't realise that she would know that it was saucy. Yeah. But that's actually a prime example, though, of how I have no.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for your questions. They have been amazing. Please come again. So if I do all the sort of stuff that needs to happen first. So on Friday, the 4th of April, I'm really happy to say, just confirmed this just the other day, I will be joined by Jessica Bull of Miss Austen Investigates, Sarah Marsh of A Sign of Her Own, and Flora Carr of The Tower, which is going to be interesting because it's the first time I've interviewed someone I have never met before at all. So that's going to be fascinating. Details about that are on Good idea to tell you the location. It's at P&G Wells in Winchester, and they have the information, and the tickets are available to be purchased at the moment. And also, if you do the QR code on the flyers that you've got on your chairs, I will also be sending out the link tomorrow there. Otherwise, thank you, Goldfinch. Thank you, Gary. And thank you, Lou, for hosting us here. This has been wonderful. Thank you, people who are not here, Caitlin Rayner in particular, and a guy in California called Johnny, who has been very inspiring to me. I'm going to have to say that because I'm going to send him the video and everything. So thank you, Johnny. And I think we have to say, Alex, Lucy, Stacey, thank you so much for being here. And they will be signing copies of their books. So do purchase one if you haven't already. I'm going to say I recommend them all because I do, absolutely. And thank you everyone for coming.
Thank you, Charlie.
Thank you so much, Charlie. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
And thank you for listening. Authors Afterword live show number 1 was recorded on Wednesday, the 26th of February, 2025, live at Goldfinch Books in Alton, Hampshire. Music and production by Charlie Place.